Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 71 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending October 6th, 2017, the Three Dingers edition. In this episode, Jay and I return for a wide-ranging discussion of some of the week's top compliance and ethics-related stories, including Roy Snell considers whether compliance officers should be liked or respected. The intersection of sports, corruption, and compliance is explored by Jacqueline Jager in an article in Compliance Week. We take a look at the Allaire FCPA enforcement action and how it emphasized the convergence of revenue recognition and corruption. We consider the question asked by Bill Coffin, editor-in-chief at Compliance Week, of who will be the next compliance hero. We note a report in the Wall Street Journal Risk and Compliance online site by Ben DiPietro that Ireland has requested a review by the European Court of Justice of the legality of contracts governing data transfers between the EU and the United States, and also whether Privacy Shield will be in effect. Matt Kelly reports on more chaos from the Trump administration as HHS Secretary Tom Price resigns, and Matt ties it to a compliance program. We take a look at yesterday's win by the Houston Astros over the Boston Red Sox in the first game of the ALDS playoffs, where Jose Altuve became only the ninth player in MLB history to hit 3 home runs in a playoff game. We discuss my October entry of 1 month to a more effective compliance program, where I consider business ventures such as joint ventures, mergers and acquisitions, distributors, channel ops partners, teaming agreement, and all other manners of business ventures. This month is sponsored by the Volkov Law Group. Jay and I will be podcasting a live episode of This Week in FCPA from the SCCE conference. Stay tuned for details on date and time. We note the posting of the Everything Compliance, episode 19, where we have the top Roundtable Compliance podcast. I discuss the premiere of a new exciting service offering that I'm providing, the Doing Compliance Masterclass, which is an online training which will take you a deep dive into the doing of compliance going forward. The This Week in FCPA podcast is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network. Hello again. This is Tom Fox, the Compliance Evangelist, back with Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, for another episode of This Week in FCPA. This is episode 71 for the week ending October 6th, 2017, the Three Dingers edition. If you don't know what Three Dingers means now, you will know by the end of this episode. So, Jay, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. We've got a great week of compliance in sports ahead of us, and next week, we hope to see a lot of you folks at the SCCE Compliance and Ethics Institute, which starts next Sunday night. So take it away, Tom. Speaking of FCCE, what does Roy Snell consider?
So Roy, if you don't know Roy Snell, you should. He is the current president of the SCCE, although he has announced his retirement. And Roy can rant with the best of them. And sometimes he gets going and he can't stop. Sometimes he gets going and in the end, you get an email in a few minutes, please delete everything I said in your brain. And sometimes he publishes his rants. And I think we have an example, Jay, of the third category, because he posted a blog on the SCCE Compliance and Ethics blog site entitled Compliance Apologists Being Liked and Being Respected. And he really talked about the dynamic tension, I think, that many compliance officers feel, and perhaps many people feel. And he said that sometimes you just have to put your foot down and you have to say no, and you have to protect people from themselves, and you have to keep people from doing stupid things that might get the company criminally prosecuted or the person thrown in jail. And he ended with saying, stay calm and carry on does not mean whip out a board game and buy donuts for everyone, every time there is resistance. Be a good manager. Look at parents who think they're doing a great job raising their children. They may irritate their children on occasion, but they will have their children's respect in the long run. And I don't often think about being a compliance officer as being akin to a parent. And he ends up with apologizing is not how it works. Apologizing is not how any of this works. And so he really, I think, spoke to a dynamic that requires you as a compliance practitioner to not only be proud of what you do, but also do so in a manner that's commensurate with what is required, so that if you have to keep people from doing something stupid that's going to get the company or themselves in trouble, you should not apologize for that. And so I'm going to be very interested to talk to Roy about this blog post when we get to the Compliance and Ethics Institute. But my sense is that it was a rant over something that got him going.
So do you remember that one-man play got turned into a movie with Robert De Niro, and it's called The Bronx Tale?
Yeah.
And he's kind of caught between two worlds. De Niro plays a bus driver who's, working class Italian immigrant, and the kid really gravitates more towards Chaz Palminteri, who is the mafioso. And I guess the question that they asked there is it better to be feared or to be loved? And that's probably a take on Machiavelli, but I think that's really the crux of what Roy is talking about in this rant of his.
So I guess, Jay, I find it to be a little bit of a false dichotomy that coming out of the corporate legal function, that was certainly something that in-house lawyers do. But it's, Roy comes down to, at the end, it's all about respect. And I could not agree with him more about that. And I think in the corporate world, and I'd certainly be interested in your views on this, is that if you are viewed as someone who will not stand up for whatever they're required to stand up for, whether that be compliance, whether that be legal, whether that be internal audit, whether that be sales, whether that be human resources, whatever it may be, you're basically useless, and you're not doing your job. So I think respect is a key component.
Yeah, I think, everyone gets a reputation for what they can add on the team. And if you are either wishy-washy or you don't really have a firm moral compass, that's really going to dictate whether or not you are able to, succeed not only in your function, but also within the greater company.
So anyway, check out the article and see what you think. Next, Jay, we have another article on the NCAA scandal that we premiered and previewed and went into a deep dive last week. This one is by Jacqueline Jaeger, our colleague at Compliance Week. And she, as Jacqueline always does, thoroughly reviewed the facts, but she actually then went to a couple of topics I'd like to maybe explore a little bit more that we touched on last week, Jay. And this first is the broader implications of the scandal, and the second is the compliance lessons. And really on the broader implications, I think she nails it when she says, on the surface, the nature of the NCAA fraud and corruption scheme appear to be relevant only to the world of college athletics. However, upon a deeper dive, it raises critical questions about the relationship of the major apparel companies, the colleges, and the universities they are in cahoots with. And indeed, I would raise that to the bigger part of amateurism in college sports. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that relationship morphs as a result of this investigation. And then on compliance lessons, this is something that I think you and I are going to be talking about for quite some time, or what are the compliance lessons from this case? And one is certainly know who you're doing business with. And as she noted, she quoted one commentator in her article who said, in these cases, the lack of due diligence controls is clear. For example, in steering players to a financial advisor who most coaches did not ask about the financial advisor's qualification or track record in handling players' monies. And a Google search would have showed the securities fraud charges against them. So those types of very simple due diligence and very simple company controls around fake invoices and false entries, how you circumvent those controls are highly relevant to the compliance practitioner. Also, there will be, I think, a pretty big shakeup of compliance at colleges and universities around the country as they strive to make sure that their business partners are doing business in compliance. So it's going to be really interesting, I think, to see that. Jacqueline, I think, has really highlighted a couple of points that are very important for the compliance practitioner to take a look at now. We mentioned last week that if you work at an apparel company, we would certainly suggest that you see what relationships, if any, you have with universities or colleges, and make sure that controls are in place to accurately account for any expenses and that your internal controls are effective.
I'd also like to give a shout out to a friend of mine, Jeff Lightman, who's the co-chair of the litigation department at Richards, Kibbe, and Orby, and he's quoted in the second paragraph of Jacqueline's story, and his quote is, "This case demonstrates how prosecutors and regulators continue to view the sports world as a high-risk industry for bribery and corruption. This should be a wake-up call for all organizations affiliated with the sports world." So I think we kind of touched upon this last week that, first there was FIFA, now you've got NCAA, and most of these sporting leagues always have this kind of system where you're bringing people up from, very highly functioning amateurs to bringing them into the professional organization. So I've got to feel that there's a feeding pipeline like this, and this is just not something that only afflicts basketball or soccer, but to Jeff's point and to Jacqueline's point of the article, that I think it's probably the dark underbelly of most of professional and amateur athletics.
So next up is one of the things that came up around the Alear FCPA enforcement action that we took a deep dive into last week. And Richard Bastrong wrote an article entitled "Why Foreign Bribery and Accounting Fraud Happen Together." And I would really expand the topic that he starts with to revenue recognition and bribery and corruption. But Richard, I think, really highlights a key convergence that most compliance practitioners do not consider, and that is recognizing revenue and corruption. So how many times, Jay, have we seen where business operatives did something to recognize revenue when they shouldn't have, which was actually a part of a bribery scheme? And probably the most obvious one that pops to mind is the Hewlett-Packard bribery scheme in Germany, where they literally at the last day of each quarter flipped equipment to a distributor with a price uplift and continued to do so over several quarters. And then HP would repurchase the equipment, all at uplifts over several quarters. And this was used to create a pot of money to pay bribes. And the FCPA obviously has the accounting provisions, which require accurate books and records and effective internal controls. And I don't think that compliance practitioners really think through the accounting fraud that is used, and usually in conjunction with a bribery act to hide the bribes, and also really put extra revenue on a company's books. So really interesting convergence of those two, and I think that's something that compliance practitioners need to consider a little bit more often.
Definitely. Next up on our list is we're going back to Compliance Week, and Bill Coffin asks, who will be the next compliance hero?
Right, and this was in conjunction with National Compliance Officer Day, which started last year, spearheaded by SAI Global. And its intent was to really bring out, to celebrate the unique burdens carried by the compliance officers, the compliance professionals, who really help drive the ethical, legal, and sustainable business practices in corporations. And Bill wrote a great piece on this. He interviewed the new CEO of SAI Global, Peter Granat, and it was a discussion around how compliance officers really can use many of the newest technological tools to help them move their programs forward, and that the thing that I've talked about for some time, Jay, which is and this may resonate with you coming more from the business side of things, is that how compliance officers really need to hone their business skills so that they can better understand the full scope of activities at the companies they serve. They can speak to the board, they can speak to the chief executives in the business language they understand. If compliance officers are going to explain ROI for compliance, you can't do it by talking about compliance. You have to do it by talking about business. And that's something that law schools really don't teach compliance officers. Reading a spreadsheet is a critical skill now for a compliance officer. And when you take it in the context of the Department of Justice's evaluation of corporate compliance programs and Wei Chin and operationalizing compliance, this is exactly what the compliance officer needs to be ready to do, and exactly where the compliance profession is going, which is operationalizing compliance, making it a part of the business process, and requiring successful compliance officers to have these skills.
Yeah, I think, we also talk a lot about being able to be cross-trained, and with some of these programs now, when you're at a larger company like GE or a big global organization, frequently they like to move their personnel around into different departments, so you get an idea what is sales doing, what is marketing is doing, and how you understand what the model of that business is. Because to our earlier point, when you were talking about HP and how they're inflating the invoices and basically selling equipment to themselves and marking it up and creating a slush fund, if you don't understand the way your business works and you don't know how you do business globally, it's going to make it extremely hard for you to try to help manage that business from an ethics and compliance perspective, and also how you're going to approach it from a mitigating risk perspective.
So next up, we had a very interesting decision, Jay, from the, the court in Ireland, but it's going to be something that really impacts the legality of data transfers from Europe to the U.S. And that's really, I guess it's Schrems 2. And Ben DiPietro reported in the Risk and Compliance Journal on the Wall Street Journal online site that Ireland had requested a review by the European Court of Justice on the legality of contracts that came up after the Schrems decision, and that this language that many companies use came into place after the safe harbor provision was struck down in Schrems 1. So it also led to the negotiation of Privacy Shield, which is out there. So we're going to have a ruling on the contract language, but it's, I think, going to really expand further into Privacy Shield and whether or not that meets the requirements under the EU Court of Justice. So a big case for American companies. Of course, our colleague Jonathan Armstrong and the Cordery Law Firm has put out a client alert on this. Whether it's a threat to model clauses in contracts, international data transfers. So what are going to be the implications? And we don't know when a decision might be expected, but it's certainly whatever the decision is going to greatly impact U.S. companies.
So another friend of the podcast, Matt Kelly, who's in Boston, had something to say about Tom Price and ethics earlier this week on his Radical Compliance site. What's steaming, Matt?
Well, our good friend, our former friend, Tom Price, who headed up the Department of Human Health and Services, really went on just a profligate spending spree, racking up over $1 million for hiring private planes for travel. He has offered to repay 51,000 of this, which is apparently his cost for a commercial economy class fare ticket, even after having charged off all of these costs to the government. And Matt, as you would expect, in only a way that Matt can, certainly criticized the ethical stance of the Trump administration and Mr. Price specifically. But what really struck me is, or the lack of ethics of that administration, probably would be the better way to phrase it. But what struck me, Jay, was how he demonstrated that if you really have a poor ethical culture, which certainly the administration does have a poor ethical culture, particularly at the top, it increases your expense of your controls. And the example he gave came straight out of the Tom Price situation, which was that the current White House Chief of Staff, James Mattis, not James Mattis, he's the Secretary of Defense, but the current John Kelly, Chief of Staff, decreed that he would have to approve chartered airfare. Now, there's currently a U.S. government circular about private airfare, and it sets out the criteria for when officials should decide, or they should or should not, take expensive air travel on the company dollar. But now, Kelly has said that there will be no more travel using private airfare without approval from the Chief of Staff. Now, that's certainly a way to get a handle on this, and it may be a way for Kelly to get everyone's attention. It may be a way to solve the burgeoning PR problem of the lack of ethics of this administration. But think about the cost. You've got literally the Chief of Staff of the President of the United States approving travel for cabinet officials. And is that the best and highest and best use of his time? So if you have a weak ethical environment, then you're going to have strong and expensive internal controls. So conversely, if you have a strong ethical environment, you would not have to have Secretary Kelly reviewing the travel. So I thought it was an interesting way to consider this problem. If you have ethics imbued with your top management and you believe that they're going to do the right thing, then you trust but verify. Here, you've got to go over literally every travel expense, and that's a front-end cost to Chief of Staff Kelly that is really very high.
Yeah, there's a couple other quotes in here that are interesting. I think why you mentioned Mattis before is, if you recall, earlier in the summer, he circulated a memo to everyone at the Defense Department stressing the importance of practicing ethics and making sure it would be an ethical muscle memory that you could rely upon. And as Matt closes out his article, he talks about our colleague Steve Kozlow, who is currently the Chief Compliance Officer at Allianz Life. And at a roundtable event a few years ago, Steve had said, if I had 1 hour to worry about ethics or compliance, I'll worry about ethics every time, because if I get that right, the compliance stuff gets a lot easier. So if we take a look at that maxim in this situation, the compliance stuff's getting a lot harder. And when you have a chief of staff having to be a travel agent, that really does not speak well for the situation and the setup at hand.
So once again, kudos to Matt Kelly, and great piece and some great lessons learned for not only the compliance practitioner, but also the compliance profession. So Jay, we have some sporting news.
Yes, I'm sitting down. The sharp objects have been put away. Tell me, Tom.
The Patriots hung on to win last night. So kudos to my main man, fellow Wolverine, and quarterback extraordinaire, only slowed down from his march to the Hall of Fame because he's still playing, Tom Brady. But we also played a little baseball in Houston yesterday, and I don't know if it actually made it to the West Coast or not. But the Houston Astros stomped, let me repeat that, stomped the Boston Red Sox in the opening game of the ALDS series here at Minute Maid Park, 8-2. But I don't want to talk about that. I'm not here to talk about the stomping, the trashing of Chris Sales, the just total domination of the Astros, because I'm not here to talk about that. But I am here to
Okay, what are you here to talk about, Tom?
Yes, I am. I'm not here. We're not going to talk about the stomping the Astros gave because, that just, it's a fact. But what we are here to talk about and really celebrate is the diminutive, smallest Astro, Jose Altuve, the league leader in batting average, hopefully MVP candidate since Mike Trout had a down year and he's the presumptive winner every year. But Jose Altuve did something, Jay, that only 9 other players in the history of Major League Baseball have done, which is have 3 home runs in a playoff game. So let me just name some of these other folks whose company he joins. Albert Pujols, Andre Beltran, George Brett, Reggie Jackson, and Babe Ruth. Last person to do so was Pablo Sandoval, also a fellow Venezuelan. And as I've wondered, what's in the water in Venezuela that lets these guys hit so well. But it was just a sight to behold to see the diminutive second baseman crushing ball after ball after ball after ball, while Houston crushed pitch after pitch after pitch, all the way to their 8-2 win. So really, I can't remember. Are you a Red Sox fan?
I've been known to support them on the years that they win the World Series. Yes.
Okay. Well, very good. Very good. True homer. So I don't know if that news made it out to Los Angeles or not, but in case it didn't, I wanted to certainly let you know. And we don't get a lot of athletic celebrations in Houston, so the few we get, we got to just run with.
Well, I guess all I can say is congratulations, well deserved. The first inning definitely looked like home run derby, and looked like Sale was just putting them in so they could hit them out of the Minute Maid. But it's a 5-game series. Last year, the Bo Sox got swept in 3 by the Sons of Francona, the Cleveland Indians. So I think if they can get out of here with a split, they'll be okay. And I think we both know that sports can change on any given day, so we need to be measured. But, right now, Houston Strong needs something to celebrate, so I think you should celebrate your Astros. And something else to celebrate, Tom. You've got your 1 month to a more effective compliance program in October. If you can tell us about that, and then tell us about the new masterclass that you announced this week.
Sure. I think as everyone knows, I'm going through 1 year of a deep dive into effective compliance program. And this year we're doing business ventures, and I'm taking a look at compliance in the M&A context, joint ventures, distributors, channel ops partners, and really all manner of business venture. The second week, this first week, I took a deep dive into mergers and acquisitions, and I continue that deep dive next week. And also, we began to look at joint ventures under the FCPA. I'm extraordinarily pleased to have Mike Volkov with the Volkov Law Group as my sponsor this month, and we've linked to it in the show notes. But the podcast is available on the FCPA Compliance Report, iTunes, Libsyn, and JD Supra. And thanks for bringing up my new exciting services offering, which I'm really excited about, Jay. It's called the Doing Compliance Masterclass. And as you know, I really fancy myself as the nuts and bolts guy, and I try to bring the best practices of a compliance program to the greater compliance community. And so I've decided to put together a Doing Compliance Masterclass online. And every month I'm going to post we're going to have a webinar and post that webinar, which gives you insight into one facet of having a Doing Compliance Masterclass. The first episode will go up on October 23rd of this year. The price, hopefully you'll think is right because it's only $79 per month. You can join really at any time. And if you hopefully will join for the year, and there's a discount for that, but you'll get 12 months of what I believe is the top commentary on doing compliance. And I think it's only through the doing compliance that a company will fully protect itself. So I'm really pleased to do this and looking forward to talking with folks, visiting with folks, and really continuing the educational component of what I can bring to the greater compliance community. Jay, you have mentioned several times the SCCE upcoming conference, which begins on Sunday, October 15th in Las Vegas. I'm really pleased to announce that you and I are going to do a live Facebook podcast from the SCCE. We're currently scheduled for Tuesday, October 17th at 4 p.m. That will be 4 p.m. Pacific time. So perhaps so that makes it a little bit later for folks on the East Coast or Central Time. But we're going to do a live Facebook podcast. We will also have that available in audio form. But I'm really looking forward to doing some live stuff. And this, since we'll both be in the same location, Jay, really gives us an opportunity to expand our service offerings from This Week in FCPA.
And we never know who will stop by when you're at the SCCE. Somebody who's ranting, somebody who's raving, somebody new that we meet. So we're looking forward to doing that live. Also, something else that really came out of last year's SCCE CEI is the Everything Compliance podcast. And we have an episode that posted yesterday with Tom pinch hitting for Mike Volkov, with Matt Kelly, with Jonathan Armstrong and myself, and we recorded that podcast about a week ago. So we had a very heavy emphasis on the NCAA pay for shoes scandal, and as always, many things that are on our minds. So I think that pretty much takes care of the docket for today. Is that right, Tom?
You know, I think it does, and we've gone on pretty long. Jay, why don't you take us home?
So on behalf of Tom Fox, the compliance evangelist, and myself, Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitor, we'd like to thank you for sharing some of your time with us this week as we take a look at the week in FCPA that was for the week ending October 6, 2017.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you for listening to episode 71 of This Week in FCPA. If you have listened to this podcast on iTunes, I would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also help get the word out about the only compliance podcast on a weekly roundup of all things FCPA compliance and ethics related. If you have any questions, you can email me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. You can reach Jay at jrosen@affiliatedmonitors.com. I hope you will join us for our first live podcast, direct from the SCCE 2017 Compliance and Ethics Institute. We will certainly let you know the timing of that event. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. I hope you will join us again. This Week in FCPA is a part of the Compliance Podcast Network.